Picture a determined widow standing in the heart of a dusty frontier town, revolver at her hip, facing down the very men who dared to snuff out her husband's life. This powerful moment is at the center of our story, a tale of secrets, betrayal, and one woman's unwavering resolve to unearth the truth. If that single scene sparks your curiosity, then you won't want to miss the full account of how she brought corruption to its knees in Redwood Bend. In the sections that follow, we'll delve into every twist, the missing journal pages, the shady land deals, and the explosive final showdown that tests the courage of a grief-stricken widow against a web of conspirators. To uncover the fate of everyone caught in this tangled intrigue, from double-crossing councilmen to hesitant allies, be sure to watch until the very end. And if you love compelling stories like this, remember to subscribe to our channel for more tales of grit and redemption. They handed Iris Beck a neatly folded flag on a brisk afternoon, just after they lowered her husband into the hard earth. Everyone said the right words, solemn, respectful, and empty. The mayor stiffly mentioned sacrifice. The preacher patted Iris's shoulder and mumbled something about the Lord calling the sheriff home. Neighbors she barely knew offered whispered condolences or simply avoided her eyes. But none of that changed the cold fact her husband, Sheriff Peter Beck, was gone dead under circumstances no one could properly explain. Iris was told, in softly urgent tones, to be still, to accept that accidents happened, to let the dust settle. Grief, they told her, should be borne in silence and dignity. For a while she complied. She shuttered the windows of her modest home on the outskirts of Redwood Bend and let the world pass her by. During those weeks, the house remained draped in a profound hush, broken only by the slow ticking of the old grandfather clock. She could still catch the faintest scent of Peter's pipe tobacco in the living room, as if he might walk in at any moment and hang his hat by the door. But each time her gaze swept the walls, all she saw was a polished badge that would never again be pinned to a living man's chest. The loneliness, though intense, was not what made her pause in that hush of mourning. It was a simmering suspicion that settled like a splinter beneath her ribs. The official statement was straightforward. Sheriff Beck had died quickly in an apparent mishap near the rocky ravines west of town. No eyewitnesses, no suspects, no plausible cause, only a muddy rumor about a horse stumbling in the dark. It was the kind of explanation no one could question too vigorously without rousing the ire of Redwood Bend's leadership. The mayor gave her a rigid nod and a slip of paper with the short official summary. Then he suggested she heal quietly. Perhaps take a trip to visit distant relatives if she had any. The townspeople mostly nodded in agreement. Life would go on, they implied, and perhaps it was better to leave unsettling mysteries buried with the sheriff. But Iris found herself unable to settle back into any semblance of peace. For one thing, the details about how Peter died just didn't fit the man she knew so intimately. He was precise, methodical, rarely took undue risks. He had served as Redwood Bend's sheriff for nearly a decade and had come out of far more dangerous scrapes than a simple ravine ride. Also, the day they brought the body back, she noticed his boots resting some 30 feet from where the undertaker claimed he was found. His old hat was never recovered, and his most trusted companion, a well-worn journal, arrived in her possession a week after the funeral, minus a single page carefully removed. So instead of letting grief run its course in dusty silence, she began listening to the hollow feeling in her gut. She spent her nights standing in the dark front room, her eyes pinned to the silhouette of Peter's badge, and wondered who had taken that page, why they had destroyed it, and what secret had compelled them to kill an honest sheriff. Then at last, something in her shifted, the hush broke, she decided to find answers, come what may. 6 weeks after the funeral, Iris stepped into Peter Beck's old study, a cramped space at the back of the house that still carried the faint aroma of saddle oil and brewed coffee. The desk was scattered with a mismatch of items, a stack of receipts tied with twine, a dusty bottle of ink, a pair of battered ledgers, and a chipped lantern that Peter had never found time to repair. She settled into his squeaky wooden chair and pulled open the heavy bottom drawer. Beneath some neatly folded maps, her trembling hands found the journal just as she'd been told, but also something else wrapped in a faded bandana. Peter's revolver. The official report had claimed that the sheriff's sidearm was missing at the scene. Yet here it was. The weight of it made her heart pound. She traced the worn handle with her fingertips and felt all the unspoken truth swirling around this silent piece of iron. She couldn't help but recall the times she'd seen Peter holster it before riding off to handle a dispute or track down rustlers. He had always come back dusty but smiling, though there was often tension in his eyes. secrets he carried to spare her from worrying. Unfolding the journal next, she turned the pages with a delicate touch, scanning the neat scribbled entries. Peter was known for being sparse with words, but he was thorough in his notes, dates, suspects, times of arrests, hush money rumors. Then there was the glaring gap, the missing page torn out with care. It wasn't the absence of words that struck her most. It was the deliberate nature of the removal. Some detail had been erased, something critical enough that someone risked rummaging through a dead man's possessions. Determined to find clues, she skimmed the remaining pages. One cryptic line caught her eye on the back cover. "If I don't come back, it wasn't an accident." The words tugged at her chest. That night she sat on her porch, the revolver resting on her lap, the journal propped on the small side table. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dusty front yard, turning the horizon into ribbons of fire. Her next-door neighbor, Claudia Wright, came by as she often did. The widow was used to seeing Claudia approach with a covered dish or some small token of neighborly concern. But this time when Claudia spotted the gun and Iris's steely gaze, she stopped short. "You're done staying quiet, aren't you?" Claudia asked softly, her voice like a gentle hush over a graveyard. Iris merely nodded. She no longer needed to say much. Her expression held the resolve that had been slowly forming in the weeks since her husband was laid to rest. Her friend's eyes flicked to the revolver. Concern lit her features, but there was also something like respect. In Redwood Bend, few women carried firearms openly, but Iris had never been particularly concerned with convention. It was only that in the past she had been content letting Peter handle the uglier truths of the world. But things had changed. Come morning, Iris packed a small satchel with traveling essentials: jerky, water, a coil of rope, a stack of banknotes, and that battered journal. She slid a daguerreotype of Peter between the pages, a reminder of the man she was fighting for, and let her hair fall loosely beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Leading her old mare from the stable, she steeled herself to ride into the heart of Redwood Bend. There would be questions, there might be confrontations, but the time for silent mourning had ended. Redwood Bend was neither large nor small, a modest frontier settlement straddling a river bend, known for its tall redwoods and the seasonal logging trade. Its people tended to keep to themselves, trusting only those they had grown up beside. When Iris rode into the center of town that morning, she felt every eye on her. In the weeks since Peter's funeral, she had made scant appearances merely out of necessity. Now seeing her upright in the saddle with a determined set to her jaw made folks uneasy. Some gave curt nods as she passed, others edged away, as if her presence might spark trouble. She guided her mare to the building that still bore the chipped wooden sign reading, "Sheriff's Office." Inside, the air felt stale dust motes swirling in the streams of morning light. Behind the main desk sat a young deputy named Jonas Clark, barely in his early 20s, who wore the star, mostly because someone had to. He rose to his feet when he saw her. Iris noticed how he swallowed hard, clearly unsure how to handle a confrontation with the former sheriff's widow. "Mrs. Beck," Jonas said, tipping his hat in that awkward way he did. I wasn't expecting. I need the old case files from August," Iris said, keeping her voice steady. Jonas blinked. "They aren't complete," he stammered. "A lot went missing after the funeral. Some of it might still be in boxes, but I wouldn't know how to." "I'll settle for what's left," she replied. Her tone allowed no room for argument. She brushed past him into the cramped back room where iron filing cabinets held the stories of Redwood Bend's criminals and innocents alike. Most of the drawers were locked, but Jonas provided a key, his hands trembling so much that the key jingled as it slid into the lock. Iris yanked open the cabinet that bore the label August. Folder after folder, she thumbed through them systematically. Then one name caught her attention: Timothy Ralston. It jolted her memory. This man had been the last person Peter arrested on some smuggling suspicion before the sheriff's suspicious death. She pulled the file, scanning the brief record. Timothy Ralston had been brought in for trespassing near private ranch land, held overnight, released the following morning. Then exactly 3 days later, Peter was found dead in that ravine. The mention of Ralston left a sour taste in her mouth. She stuffed the file into her coat. Without a word, she left Jonas behind, heading out into the midday sun. As she moved down the boardwalk, she heard hushed whispers from the passers-by, but she kept her chin high. Something about Timothy Ralston or his associates tied into her husband's final ride. She had no proof yet, only a name, but it was a name that had surfaced in Peter's journal as well. TR had appeared more than once in her husband's neat scrawl. That evening, alone in her home once more, Iris settled beside a flickering lantern, reading and rereading the file. The bare facts told her little, but the timing was suspicious. Why release a known smuggler so quickly? Why had no one in Redwood Bend pressed for an investigation into the sheriff's death beyond the cursory glance that the mayor demanded? Then there was a note scrawled near the bottom. Suspected association with stolen goods, possibly connected to outside shipments, danger level high. Peter had underlined it 3 times, an unusual flourish for such a careful man. The last piece that sealed Iris's resolve was a single line her husband had penned on the back cover of his journal in faint pencil. They want me gone. She understood now. If Peter suspected a deeper corruption or a smuggling operation, who else might be involved? And how high did it reach in Redwood Bend? The next day, Iris rose before sunrise and rode west out of Redwood Bend. The ridge that overlooked the ravine where Peter's body was found lay cold and steep, the path winding through rough switchbacks. Winter's early frost left the terrain slippery, but she pressed on, scanning the ground for any sign of tracks or clues that might have been overlooked. She felt oddly calm out here, away from the stale hush of the town. The wind tugged at her hair, and each breath of the sharp morning air steadied her nerves. She found the very spot the undertaker had indicated, a bluff above a rocky drop, where supposedly Peter had fallen and died. Iris dismounted and stepped closer, noticing how the frost crunched under her boots. Though 6 months had passed, her gaze caught a small glint of metal lodged between 2 stones. A spent cartridge. Kneeling, she gingerly worked it free. The caliber was different from Peter's revolver. So someone else had fired a shot here, or at least fired a weapon using that cartridge. Why had no one discovered this earlier? She wandered another dozen yards, scouring the scrub. Then she came across faint impressions of hoof prints. They were old, not from the time of her husband's death, but perhaps more recent than she expected. More riders had visited this area in the weeks since the tragedy. Iris felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Had they been looking for something or checking to see if the scene was still undisturbed? Armed with her newfound evidence, Iris returned to Redwood Bend that evening. Yet she didn't stride into the saloon or make public accusations. She chose a quieter route, questioning people she trusted, few though they were and those she believed might talk without raising an uproar. She spoke to Claudia Wright while buying a handful of supplies, to the kindly schoolteacher's wife while helping mend a torn curtain, and even to Jonas when he seemed less nervous. One name kept coming up, a man wearing black gloves rumored to have a scar along his temple, who'd passed through Redwood Bend a few weeks after Peter's funeral. He asked questions about the sheriff, about potential land deals, and about a back gate to the jail. He never left a full name, only paid for whiskey and lodging, then limped out of town as quietly as he'd arrived. Iris's next stop was Daphne Martin's boarding house, which she knew to be the only place in Redwood Bend that kept thorough logs of guests, if only because Daphne prided herself on tidy ledgers. Iris walked into the lobby, catching the lingering scent of pine soap. Daphne greeted her as if no rift had ever grown between them, despite the fact that in the wake of Peter's death, neither woman had spoken more than a handful of words. He wore black gloves, Iris said without preamble. He had a limp. Stayed with you for one night, left in the morning. You recall his name. Daphne's eyes darted away and she clutched the edge of the counter. But after a long moment, she produced the slim guest ledger. There, in neat handwriting, sat a name that made Iris's stomach drop. Timothy Ralston. So he hadn't just been arrested months ago. He'd come back for reasons unclear. Iris's grip tightened on the edge of the ledger, her pulse pounding in her ears. Confronting Daphne was like confronting a ghost of old trust. Iris remembered times when Peter would call Daphne a helpful sort, someone who minded her own business but would come forward with the truth if truly pressed. Now the boarding house owner shifted uncomfortably beneath Iris's unwavering gaze. Timothy Ralston, Daphne said, barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Iris. He paid in cash, stayed one night, asked questions about Redwood, Bend, about certain routes, about who might carry keys in the sheriff's office. I didn't think it would matter at the time. You never told anyone? Iris asked, keeping her voice calm. Daphne's knuckles whitened on the ledger. I didn't want trouble. He had this threatening air, and then he vanished at dawn. I convinced myself it was just a drifter passing through. Aisha swallowed the bitterness rising in her throat. She knew Redwood Bend thrived on not asking too many questions, especially from outsiders who might bring commerce. But someone had threatened her husband or worked with others to orchestrate his death. Now, seeing Ralston's name again confirmed that there was more than a random accident at play. Later that evening, back in Peter's study, Iris discovered a hidden compartment in his desk, one she might have missed if not for running her fingers across the wood's underside. Inside the shallow space lay a wax-sealed envelope addressed not to Iris, but to Daphne Martin. The sender's name scrawled in fading ink made her heart pound. Timothy Ralston. This was no chance lodging inquiry. Ralston had been in close communication with Daphne, or at least intended to be. She opened the letter, carefully, eyes scanning its contents. It spoke of land deals out west, clandestine shipments that needed to move without prying eyes, and the need for silence about certain patrol routes. The tone oozed intimidation, a warning that Redwood Bend's sheriff problem had to be resolved. Iris felt her blood turn to ice. Her husband had known about this letter, had hidden it. He must have been trying to protect Daphne or glean more information about Ralston's operation. But now, with Peter gone, the letter lay unread, sealed away. In a swirl of anger and betrayal, Iris stuffed the letter into her coat. Riding into town once more, she marched straight to the boarding house. Daphne was wiping down the counter. Upon seeing Iris's blazing eyes, she dropped the rag. Iris slammed the letter onto the countertop. "Explain," she said. Daphne paled, her voice faltering. I didn't know. I swear I never got that letter." "He must have meant to threaten me into providing him information about the jail or your husband's patrol. He approached me before I turned him away. I thought that was the end. Iris, I never wanted Peter harmed. I was scared." The explanation fell on Iris's ears like a distant echo. Redwood Bend was full of scared people, scared to speak, scared to question, and fear had cost her husband his life. "He was your friend," Iris hissed, voice trembling. "He needed you to warn him, but you kept silent." Daphne only bowed her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. Iris's anger flared, but under it lay a deep sadness. The complicity of silence was sometimes as deadly as pulling a trigger. Determined not to rely solely on reluctant townsfolk or incomplete files, Iris decided to retrace Peter's final steps in a more methodical way. She spent days collecting scraps of information about Ralston's associates and about any shady dealings Redwood Bend council members might have been part of. One name cropped up repeatedly in hushed tones: Wyatt Collins, a man rumored to be negotiating large-scale logging contracts and possibly dabbling in smuggled firearms. He had gained sudden influence among the town's more powerful men soon after Peter died. People spoke of Wyatt in veiled references, as if even speaking his name too loudly might invite trouble. Further fueling Iris's resolve was a coded log she found among Peter's things. Each entry was minimal, just letters, times, and cryptic symbols, but one pair of initials repeated: TR. She also noticed a date underlined twice: August 19th, the day before Peter's supposed accident. What had happened that night? Why had Peter circled it with such emphasis? On a chilly morning, Iris set out for the ridge again, this time accompanied by an old scout named Daniel Whitecloud. He was a man of few words, but he owed Peter a debt from years back. The sheriff had intervened when Daniel was wrongly accused of horse theft. Now Daniel repaid that kindness by helping Iris pick up Ralston's trail. Together they navigated narrow passes beneath the ridge and discovered a small, hidden campfire site. The ashes were cold, but not ancient. Someone had been there in the past week, possibly watching the ravine. Daniel found footprints leading away, though they disappeared among rocky outcroppings. Returning to Redwood Bend, Iris learned that Wyatt Collins had been making discreet deals, purchasing rope lantern oil and a new rifle supposedly for the upcoming hunt. But the local huntsman insisted it wasn't the right season. The whiff of suspicion grew stronger. One late afternoon, Iris spotted Wyatt stepping out of the newly painted town hall flanked by two councilmen. He glanced at her with the faintest smirk before tipping his hat. That smug confidence caused her heart to burn. She felt in her pocket the ripped-out letter from Ralston, which mentioned collaborators in Redwood Bend. Could Wyatt be one of them? That same evening, a commotion stirred in town. A horse had galloped in, riderless. Lathered in sweat, Iris recognized it as Daniel Whitecloud's mount. Its saddle torn blood on its flank. Jonas Clark reached the scene first, breathless while townspeople circled in alarm. The horse sniffed the air and stomped at the dirt, spooked and trembling. Iris's mind raced. Daniel had gone back to the ridge to confirm the foot tracks, but now his horse was here alone. Fear twisted in her stomach. If Ralston or some accomplice had attacked Daniel, time was short. Her search party was meager. Just Jonas, who insisted on coming, and two older men who once served as Peter's volunteers. They left at dawn, following the route Daniel might have taken, hearts pounding with apprehension. But after hours of fruitless searching, no sign of Daniel turned up, except a scattered set of footprints leading nowhere. That night, Iris sat alone in the dimly lit study, wondering if her quest for justice had become something far more dangerous for anyone who helped her. She pressed a palm against the revolver at her side, feeling the weight of that legacy. Redwood Bend had secrets, and it seemed anyone unearthing them was met with bloodshed. Despite mounting threats, Iris refused to back down. Clutching her husband's journal, she revisited the campsite near the ravine, the following dusk, hoping for any clue as to Daniel's fate. Night fell swiftly among the pines, and the chill wind bit at her cheeks. She made a small campfire, scanning the perimeter for any flicker of movement. The darkness offered no comfort, just the rustle of distant wildlife. Finally, near midnight, a figure emerged at the edge of her camp, a man with a pronounced limp hands clad in black gloves, a jagged scar across his temple. Timothy Ralston. Iris stood with her revolver drawn in an instant. Ralston raised his gloved hands in a mocking gesture of surrender. His voice was low and raspy, as though he had not spoken in days. "Should have stayed in Redwood Bend, Mrs. Beck," he said, lips curling in a sneer. "You're meddling in matters beyond your scope." She advanced a step, gun barrel unwavering. "I want the truth," she said flatly. "Why was my husband killed? What hold do you have on this town?" Ralston shrugged, the moonlight catching the scar on his temple. He asked too many questions about shipments that needed to pass through quietly. He was warned, but your sheriff didn't listen, so he had to be removed. A ferocious anger blazed in Iris's chest. "So you shot him in the back like a coward." He shook his head slowly. "Never laid a bullet in him myself, though. I watch some men, they follow orders. But you'd be better off burying that old story. Redwood Bend would rather forget. And trust me, you can't take on everyone involved." In the flicker of the dying campfire, she saw no remorse in Ralston's eyes, only calculation. He lunged suddenly, but Iris squeezed the trigger. The shot lit the darkness in a flash. Ralston dropped to one knee, hand grasping at his upper arm. She stepped closer, pressing the gun to his chest before he could regain his footing. "Where's Daniel Whitecloud?" she demanded, voice shaking with fury. Rasping, Ralston spat on the ground. "He had a run-in with some associates of mine. Maybe he's alive, maybe not. But you keep this up, you'll both be dead." Adrenaline pounded through Iris. This man had come to kill her or scare her into silence, but he was the one trembling now. She bound his wrists with rope, ignoring his curses. Come morning, she forced him onto his feet and marched him back toward Redwood Bend. On the outskirts, they encountered Jonas Clark and a small crowd of onlookers drawn by the commotion. Alarmed murmurs rose as they recognized Ralston, bruised and bleeding, prodded along by the widow's revolver. Iris spoke without preamble. "Lock this man in the old holding cell," Jonas complied, though he looked pale. The silent watchers parted like a tide, letting her pass with her prisoner. Once Ralston was behind iron bars, Jonas asked breathlessly, "Ma'am, what do we do next?" "That depends," Iris said, her gaze steady. "Are you going to act like a deputy or just a boy with a tin star?" Jonas stood straighter, though fear still flickered in his eyes. Redwood Bend was about to have its secrets dragged into daylight. Word spread through Redwood Bend like wildfire. The sheriff's widow had captured Timothy Ralston, the elusive smuggler. By dusk, dozens of curious faces peered through the windows of the sheriff's office, whispering speculation. Some folks even dared to hope that if Ralston talked, the tangled web surrounding Peter Beck's death might be exposed. But such hope was fragile. In the pre-dawn hours, an inferno erupted in the abandoned record house near the edge of town, a structure that contained older files, property deeds, and a portion of the courthouse archives. Flames reached high into the night sky, thick smoke billowing across the rooftops. By the time townspeople managed to form a bucket brigade, the building had collapsed in on itself, leaving only a smoldering ruin. Iris stood at the edge of the scene, her fists clenched, an eyes shimmering orange from the dying embers. She didn't shed a tear, only stared. She suspected that whoever ordered Peter's death and now Daniel Whitecloud's disappearance had just tried to erase the paper trail. Redwood Bend's official past was in ashes, or so they hoped. The mayor arrived breathless and shouting directions. The council members huddled in the background, pale and silent. At their forefront stood Wyatt Collins, who wore a grim mask of concern, yet something in his stance told Iris he was more triumphant than upset. As dawn broke, she confronted Daphne Martin outside the boarding house, the stink of smoke still clinging to their clothes. "Where were you last night? Did you see anyone near the old record house?" Daphne shook her head, eyes brimming with anxiety. I was home. I heard the bells rushed out, saw the flames. I swear, Iris, if I knew who set that fire, I'd tell you. There was genuine terror in her voice, fear that Redwood Bend's conspirators would target her next. She fidgeted with her apron, glancing around as if watchers lurked behind every post. Iris then turned to Jonas, who looked miserable and lost. We can't let them scare us into silence, she told him firmly. Our best evidence might be gone, but we still have the smuggler in a cell. His expression brightened slightly, as if remembering that, yes, they did hold a key piece of the puzzle. We need to get him to talk, ma'am. But how? He's not telling me anything. She stared at Jonas's young, earnest face. He won't open up to me either, but he's already said too much in front of me. Perhaps we can use that. Before the deputy could question her plan, she continued, keep watch on that jail and don't let Wyatt or any of the council near him without me. That evening, Iris found an unwelcome visitor waiting at her doorstep. Wyatt Collins himself, standing tall in polished boots. A few men she recognized as his friends milled about near the gate. Wyatt offered a slick smile. Mrs. Beck, I've come to check on your well-being. Heard about that unfortunate incident with the record house. A real shame. She folded her arms, posture unyielding. We both know what it was. She let the accusation hang in the air. Wyatt's gaze flickered coldly, but he maintained his veneer of politeness. Let's not jump to conclusions, he said. After all, Redwood Bend has had enough tragedy. It'd be a pity if anything else unfortunate occurred. Iris recognized the threat beneath his civility, just as she recognized in Wyatt's eyes the kind of man used to controlling outcomes. She smiled bitterly. You don't scare me. Mr. Collins, you should know by now that I'm finished being silent. Wyatt tipped his hat with a forced chuckle, then departed, his footsteps echoing on the porch. Watching him go, Iris realized Redwood Bend was on the brink of an explosion, and she was holding the match. Morning came, and Iris discovered that Timothy Ralston had not fared well in the night. When she arrived at the jail, Jonas was pacing the corridor. Ralston sported fresh bruises, his lips swollen. He says someone came in, Jonas explained, voice taut. He doesn't know who they wore a mask, but they tried to beat him into keeping quiet. Iris examined the battered prisoner through the iron bars. His glare was venomous, but the unspoken truth was evident. Redwood Bend's hidden overlords sought to silence him. They must have known he could connect them to Peter's death and the network of smuggling deals. Keeping him alive was risky for them, but Iris's presence the evening before had apparently prevented them from finishing the job. Summoning her courage, Iris approached Ralston. You are safer with me than with whoever attacked you. Tell me everything you know about Wyatt Collins. The shipments, the real cause of my husband's death. He wiped blood from the corner of his mouth. Why would I tell you anything? They'll kill me if I talk. Without breaking eye contact, she replied. They'll kill you if you don't. She let that sink in. But I'm giving you a chance at a fair trial, something you never gave Peter. He studied her for a tense moment. Then in a halting voice, he admitted he had worked as a courier for a ring that smuggled firearms and contraband through Redwood Bend. Peter Beck uncovered the operation, began recording names, deals, routes. Wyatt Collins, a rising star among local businessmen, helped broker these deals under the guise of logging expansions. Council members turned a blind eye in exchange for bribes or political sway. According to Ralston, Peter got too close, so they made sure the sheriff would never ride again. Anger and relief battled within Iris as she listened. Finally, she had names, she had details. She ordered Jonas to keep Ralston locked up under constant guard and ensuring no unauthorized visitors. Then she went home, took out Peter's journal, and began jotting down everything Ralston had confessed, every name, every route. She might not be able to trust Redwood Bend's corrupt counsel with the truth, but she could muster the will of ordinary citizens. That afternoon, she walked into the center of town where a few folks were loitering near the trading post. Wordlessly, she approached the battered old podium used for announcements and hammered a notice to its surface. Town meeting, sundown sheriff's office, mandatory attendance. The onlookers murmured, exchanging alarmed glances. Redwood Bend was not accustomed to direct confrontation, especially from a widow with no official authority, but Iris intended to press forward. By the time twilight fell, nearly half the town had gathered outside the sheriff's office. Some arrived out of curiosity, others out of wariness. In the crowd, she saw worried faces like Claudia Wright's stoic gazes from the ranch hands who once respected Peter's justice, and cold-guarded stares from Wyatt Collins and his associates. Stepping forward, revolver strapped to her hip but holstered, Iris cleared her throat. I called you here because Redwood Bend deserves the truth, she began. A hush fell. For months, we've allowed rumors and fear to keep us silent. But tonight, I have the evidence that certain individuals colluded to murder Sheriff Peter Beck and to maintain a criminal smuggling operation in our very midst. She lifted the journal. I have names and I have a confession from Timothy Ralston, now locked in our jail. A tremor of excitement and dread rippled through the crowd as Iris paused, scanning the sea of faces. Wyatt Collins stepped forward, flanked by two councilmen who looked visibly uncomfortable. He forced a laugh. This is absurd. A dead man's notebook and the word of a smuggler hardly constitute proof. Besides, who appointed you judge and jury? Mrs. Beck. Iris met his gaze without flinching. No one. But Redwood Bend doesn't need a judge and jury to see the truth. The old record house was burned to the ground. Someone clearly wanted to destroy evidence. We have Ralston battered by an intruder who admitted the involvement of you and certain council members. Her voice rose. And we have my husband's blood on your hands, Mr. Collins. A hush seized the crowd. Then from somewhere in the back, Claudia Wright spoke up in a quavering voice. Iris is telling the truth. My husband overheard talk of hush payments. People have been bullied into silence. Others added their murmurs. A trickle of agreement swelling into a tide of accusations. Iris watched relief mingle with a quiet fury on the faces of everyday townsfolk who had lost cattle to rustlers or had their land threatened by anonymous men working for Wyatt. Wyatt's face hardened. Enough, he snapped. With lightning speed, he grabbed a pistol from beneath his coat and leveled it at Iris. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Jonas Clark, close by, fumbled for his weapon, but Iris was faster. Her revolver cleared leather in a heartbeat. They stood at a tense standoff, the entire town paralyzed. A faint breeze stirred the dust, carrying the smell of smoke from the still smoldering record house. Go ahead, Iris said, voice deadly calm. You think you can gun me down in front of these people and keep them quiet afterward? Her eyes darted to the crowd. Or maybe Redwood Bend has grown too weary of bullies. Something shifted then. A rancher stepped forward, rifle in hand, aimed at one of Wyatt's henchmen. Another man, an old blacksmith, brandished a shotgun. A wave of indignation united them. Wyatt Collins's bravado faltered, his eyes flicking around as he realized the tide had turned. Slowly, almost painfully, he lowered his gun and let it clatter to the ground. He knew that if he fired a single shot, he would spark a battle he could not win. Jonas moved swiftly, snapping cuffs onto Wyatt's wrists, while two local volunteers corralled the councilman who had conspired with him. People shouted curses at the would-be tyrants. Others wept, relieved that their secrets would no longer be used against them. In the midst of it all, Iris stepped back and holstered her revolver with a shaky exhalation. By sunrise, Redwood Bend buzzed with talk of a new era. Wyatt Collins and his cohorts were locked away awaiting a traveling judge. Timothy Ralston had agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. As for Daniel Whitecloud, a search party found him injured but alive in a cabin near the ridge left behind by the hired thugs who had attacked him. A few days later, Iris made her way to the quiet cemetery on the hill overlooking Redwood Bend. In her hand, she carried the journal, now filled with additions of her own. Setting it down on Peter Beck's grave, she murmured words of gratitude and farewell. She had brought the truth to light, avenged his death, and exposed a network of corruption that had been poisoning their home. In a soft, unsteady voice, she recited a promise. Justice was never about the badge alone. It was about who cared enough to stand up when no one else would. The wind blew gently through the tall grass, and the morning sun bathed Iris in golden light. There would still be sorrow, still be memories that ached, but Redwood Bend would no longer cower beneath hush money and unseen threats, standing by her husband's final resting place. Eerie, Beck felt something akin to peace, and the strength to move forward, carrying both Peter's legacy and her own new sense of purpose. Looking back, I'm struck by the resilience of one person's spirit. How Iris Beck, driven by love and justice, refused to stand by while wrongdoing flourished in her hometown. She pieced together clues, stood firm against threats, and ultimately exposed the schemes that had taken root in Redwood Bend. In doing so, she honored her husband's legacy and gave the town a chance to start anew. Though scars remain, sorrow for those lost. Regret for those who stayed silent, the promise of a better future shines in the eyes of those who now walk Redwood Bend streets free from fear. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope this account leaves you inspired by the power of truth and the courage it takes to speak up. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know which part of the story moved you the most. We'd love to discuss it with you.